as I was listening to both the music and the reading, I was paying attention to the tense. So, like the last song we had, "You Will Do Amazing Things," is talking about the future. But it also had a line in there about admiring the progress that you've made. And it also had lots of lines in there about being present, about paying attention to where you're at right here, right now. And I think a lot of Susan's reading also was about the present. And the first song by Karen Drucker also focused on that. And I find that our philosophy focuses on the present a lot. And I think there's good reason for that, right? And the 12-step groups, they say that if you've got one foot in the past and one foot in the future, you're peeing on the present. And because so many people who are not part of our philosophy spend so much time and energy on the past and on the future. They're regretting their choices from the past. They're living in things that happened in the past, their glory days or their horrible choices or whatever it might be. Or they're daydreaming about the future without actually making any plans or goals to head towards that daydream, right? And I think being in the present is a powerful, powerful spiritual practice. But to be honest with you, that's not what I'm about today. My talk today was inspired by a digital picture frame that I have in my home that's across from where I sit. And it's always showing picture after picture. I think there's like 50,000 pictures on there. And by their nature, pictures are about the past, right? So I am seeing image and image and memory and memory. And I love sitting there looking at that picture frame. And so when we had this idea about traveling, I decided that the talk was going to be about looking in the rearview mirror. Because I do believe that there is some power and some perspective that can be embraced by remembering your past. And that last song had a line that talked about it also. You know, when you talk about your progress, when I think about who I was 10, 15, 20 years ago, heck, who I was a year ago is not the same person I am today. And I think that there is a wonderful spirituality to embracing that progress, to embracing the idea that we are all evolving one step at a time. And sometimes you can't see that evolution from day to day, but when you go back, you can often see it. So I wanted to share with you today my evolution, my personal story. And I think my childhood might be unique from a lot of people in this room in that I was brought up by a militaristic atheist. My mother does not like the word God to this day. She prefers not to speak about God. She'd much rather you be cussing about anything in life. She just has no comfort level in talking about God. So the advantage to me was I did not get burdened with any kind of belief system that I hear so many people in these rooms having to unlearn. You know, I didn't have fundamentalist viewpoints that were shoved down my throat. I wasn't indoctrinated to very much other than the thought that science is really important. That was my biggest indoctrination in my childhood. And so when I walked into these rooms, I had an advantage in that I had a clean slate. What I also had was a very lax version of what God is. I didn't totally believe my mom's beliefs that there is no such thing as God and to talk about God as foolishness. But in my mind, I thought of God as being kind of this master clockworker who created all these rules and all this way of being and all this form at the very beginning of the universe and started off with the Big Bang and then stepped back and has been watching ever since. That was my belief in God before I came into these rooms. And that was an okay belief, but it doesn't really match what I feel today. What I feel today is that spirit is an active energy that, yes, was the creative force of the universe, but it's also the creative force of myself. And how could spirit create without having anything else besides itself? It had to create from itself, and therefore what was created is made of that same spiritual energy. Right? I believe that God lies within all of us, that there is God stuff within the center of my being that propels me in life. And even before I got in touch with the idea of God being in my body, I definitely was in touch with the idea of I had an intuition, right? I would know instinctively what to do or not to do in some situations. when I was 20, I wanted to buy my first car, and I'd done a little research, and I kind of knew the couple models, and I had a budget, and I was heading out of town, and I just stopped at this car dealership on my way out of town, and I saw my car. Like, I just took one look at this car, and I said, that's it. That's the car for me. And I didn't have time to do anything else because I was heading out of town. Well, 48 hours later, I came back. The car was still there as I drove by. So I went home and said, hey, Dad, come with me. Now, long story short, I bought that car without ever having driven the car. Like, I didn't have to drive that car. Number one, my dad was driving it. He was going to do the test drive. I knew I wasn't going to talk him out of doing a test drive. And number two, I figured Dad would know more than me anyway, so I just kind of followed his lead. But my intuition was strong enough that I took one look, had a thought in my head, and followed that thought. Now, as I've gotten into my spirituality, I believe that intuition is how God's speaking to me. I believe that is the voice of God. And I can't think of a time when I have followed my intuition and later gone, ooh, that was not a good choice, Heather. Right? I've made bad choices, but I've never made a bad choice when I've got that voice inside my head telling me what to do. And so that was one of the most powerful spiritual messages I got, even before I knew that was a spiritual message, was to follow my intuition. Because I didn't have any religion background, I honestly grew up thinking that God physically wrote the Bible. Like, I thought God came down with a pen and pencil in hand, wrote it on a piece of paper. Like, I heard that Moses story where he wrote rules on a tablet, so I figured, well, he just must have taken more time the next time he came down to earth and wrote everything out. And then I think I was in high school before I figured out, oh, God didn't write it. Jesus wrote the Bible. Oh, my bad. And so, that's where I didn't have the baggage that some people have. And part of that is I have a really hard time getting people's belief that the Bible is so incredibly powerful, but other religious texts aren't. Like, to me, all religious texts have incredible beauty and power. And so that is part of what I have learned in this philosophy where we talk about we embrace all paths to God, right? We don't put any one religion as being better or worse than any other religion because we believe that they're all ultimately trying to describe that same thing that's so hard to describe. And certainly I get to take a look at the dogma around each one of the religions and decide if that dogma works for me or not. I might have some things where I'm like, no, I really would rather my women folk be able to vote and drive. But I don't necessarily discount the entire religion, right? That religion has truth to it. And when I first started developing spirituality, it came because of a 12-step group. I walked into it and they talked to me about having a higher power. And I distinctly remember my very first meeting, this stranger coming up to me and I was like, I'm not too sure about this whole God thing. And she said, you know what, you don't have to believe in God, but how about do you believe that an acorn grows into an oak tree? And I was like, yeah, I got that. That makes sense. Again, I got the science background. And she says, well, what propels that acorn? What motivates it? What moves it along? What created it to have it change? When you think about how much change happens to an acorn between its start and that mighty oak tree. And that was my first grasp on spirituality, was the belief that there is something propelling life forward. And that is what I chose to call my higher power for a long time. That is what I go back to anytime I have any kind of doubts. That there is a fundamental power that is moving us forward. And on the spiritual plane, I know that to be true, and I can go back to that truth at any moment. On the human plane, I don't always see that so easily. Right? Sometimes on the human plane, I even feel like we're going backwards. And what I have learned is that there is a duality in life. There is a paradox that we are two things at once. We are human beings here having a human experience, and we are also spiritual creatures. Eternal, everlasting, spiritual creatures made from God. And that we can have both of those things going on at the same time. And my goal in life is to experience those two experiences and to mesh them together. I believe my soul is here to have experiences. My soul is here to go out and do whatever my soul wants to do. And I believe everyone has their own unique soul, and that answer for what they're here to do is totally different. For me, I'm here, and one of the things I want to do is I want to be of service to people. I want to help people. One of the things I want to do is I want to explore the world. I want to travel and see different cultures in different places. Those are the things that speak to me. And I think all of us have things that speak to yourself. And I think it is powerful to get in touch with what that might be. So as I was getting in touch with what that might be for me, I literally created my idea of spirituality. Like, I worked with a sponsor, and she's like, well, okay, if you're okay with that whole acorn to a tree thing, what else are you okay with? And I just made up all these rules. Oh, well, maybe this, maybe that, and I just had all these in my head. Yeah, this is how it works. Okay, good. And I had thought about joining a church, and I had never actually gone to a church. I'd been to church like twice in my entire life when a friend dragged me to it, so I really didn't know much about what church is like. But my 12-step group renovated this room that it was back in the 90s when the military bases were closed. And so there's a military base in San Diego, and it had like a strip mall in it. And they closed it, and they offered the strip mall places. So my 12-step group took over a little shop, and we spent like a weekend renovating it and changing it into our meeting place. Well, there was a bowling alley that anchored this shopping mall. And that bowling alley was taken over by this church that spent weeks renovating, weeks and weeks, and they would be coming in all the time, changing and building it up. And I was looking and going, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. Wonder what is going on there. And my intuition was that the people who would spend that much time and energy changing a bowling alley into a spiritual center was a place that I wanted to be. But I didn't actually take action on that intuition. And what I found is that several months later, I was part of a Toastmaster group, and it was a really big Toastmaster group for Toastmasters. It was like 30, 40 people every time. And after the Toastmaster group, one time, I'm out in the parking lot chit-chatting with probably 10 people. And we're just chit-chatting about the meeting and how it went. And at the end of the chit-chat, one person says, okay, I'll see you guys Sunday. And everyone else goes, yeah, see you Sunday. And I went, what are we doing Sunday? I didn't get an invitation. And turned out all 10 of them belonged to that church, to that spiritual center at the bowling alley. And it was called Pacific Church of Religious Science back then. And I just finally went, okay, God, I get it. Yeah, I need to be there. And that next Sunday, I went. And I was so blown away by what I heard there. Like, number one, it had like 100, 150 people there. And San Diego is a huge place. I think twice in the 12 years I lived in San Diego, I bumped into someone I knew out on the street. Well, when I walked into that church, not only did I see the 10 people from Toastmasters, I saw another 10 people from my 12-step group that I didn't know went to that church, and I saw another group of people from a business group that I belonged to. Like, there were probably 30 people I knew. And that was mind-blowing to me, to see 30 people I know in one place in this big, big city. And so I was like, wow. That really got my attention. And one of my other spiritual beliefs is that there really aren't coincidences in life. That what we call coincidence is really spirit at work. So when I walk into a giant room with a bunch of people I know, and that has never happened to me in this big city before, I believe that that is spirit bringing us together for a reason, right? And I've had lots of coincidences in my life where you're like, what are the chances? And when I start and figure out the probability, I'm like, really, it's that much. Like, there has to be some kind of guidance behind that coincidence. So the things I heard that day resonated in my heart. And if anybody's new here, I'm hoping you've got some things resonating for you. For me, I just went, yeah, that's what I made up. That's what works for me. And so I knew I was home from that very first Sunday. And I'll tell you, one of the things that really resonated for me was the saying that for us, Jesus is an example, not an exception. So in Christianity, they're taught that Jesus is the exception, that Jesus is the Son of Man, and that Jesus does things that no one else is capable of doing. And what our beliefs talk about is that Jesus had an incredible connection with Spirit, and that Jesus, through that connection, did things that seem miraculous to us. And I also have that same potential. I have that same potential within me. We call it Christ consciousness here in our group. And that to me is a very powerful, powerful concept. I do not pretend to be as powerful as Jesus. And, we can debate about, if I talk to my mom about Jesus, she's not even sure he's a real person. But so we can get off that debate. But certainly, certainly there are pieces of Jesus that I can emulate and I can appreciate and I can want to be like. The idea of loving my neighbor is a powerful part of Jesus' teaching. And I think that that is something that our world needs more of. That love expressed to total strangers. So what are some of the other things that I learned? Well, when I went to sermons, I certainly had some really inspiring, thought-provoking ideas. And that's why I'm so glad all of you are here and the people watching online. And hopefully I'm giving some of that inspiration. And if I'm not, come back another Sunday. I'm sure you'll get more. But there are some sermons that have stuck with me forever. There was a gentleman who came. I do not remember his name. I don't really remember what he looked like, but I remember his sermon. He came as a speaker from out of town, and he talked about driving on a freeway and lots of traffic. And if someone wants to get in front of you and puts on their signal, that there are different philosophies. Some people are going to speed up and make that gap smaller because they don't want that person in front of them. And some people are going to be letter-inners. And this man talked about he has chosen to be a letter-inner, that he has consciously decided when he's driving down the road, if somebody needs in front of him, he's going to slow down and wave them over and let them in. And that was a metaphor for his life, right? In life, he goes through life letting people in. And I love the idea of inclusiveness that came from that, the idea of letting people of all walks into my space. I love the idea of opening myself up to new people and new experiences, to letting people into my heart is another powerful message I got from that one sermon many, many years ago. And so looking back gives me a chance to think about those lessons, right? I don't know about you, but I don't always remember things. I've probably got worse memory than the average person. And so spending some time thinking about what to say today has been really nice for me to spend time remembering those lessons that I have heard. And another powerful, powerful tool that I learned from coming to sermons is that they have classes that they offer at these spiritual centers. And I know Reverend Lane just finished one about loving yourself, and we know we've got another one called about changing your thinking and changing your life. And I have taken, the first one used to be called Foundations. It's now Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life. So I've taken Change Your Thinking, Change Your Life twice, and I took Foundations 3 times throughout the years. This is over 25 years. And I find them to be incredibly powerful, those classes, because it's a chance for me to not just hear, like on a Sunday, but a chance for me to process and reflect back and have more experiences versus kind of, it's like by its nature, Sundays are kind of passive, right? You're sitting there receiving information, but you're not actively participating a lot. So classes are so hugely important in my life. And that Foundations class talked about this triangle that changed my thinking forever. And the triangle is the idea that in most people's belief systems, they are a victim, that things are happening to them. And if you're a victim, then that means there's also a perpetrator. There's the person doing things to you. And the third part of that triangle is the knight in shining armor, right? That person that's going to come and rescue you from the perpetrator. And that most people have that belief system. I know as a teacher, I see it in my students. I can't tell you how many times I say, why did you give me an F? Right? They make me into the perpetrator, and they're the victim. And what I learned when I buy into that system, I give all my power to the perpetrator and to the rescuer. I release any power, any domain, any control over my life at all. And so what I learned is to have a paradigm shift. I learned to think of myself as not being a victim, but to think of myself as being a powerful individual who manifests my life. And I don't have control over 100% of my life. Bad things can still happen to me, right? But I have complete control over my reaction to whatever happens to me. And it's from that intentional reaction that I exercise my control, that I exercise putting my beliefs into action. Viktor Frankl is my hero, and he really talked about that a lot. If you don't know, he was a Jewish psychiatrist who was rounded up by the Nazis and put into a concentration camp. And around him, thousands and thousands of people were dying and being killed off. And he survived. I forget how long, like a long time in that concentration camp. And he survived with an attitude of, I am not a victim, right? Viktor Frankl, locked in a concentration camp with all of his fellows around him being killed off routinely, did not believe he was a victim. That's a very powerful belief. And if he can hold on to that in a concentration camp, I can hold on to that when the crap happens in my life that does not compare. Right? And another thing that he said that I think is so, so important is he said, between stimulus and response, there is space. So stimulus is what happens. Response is what I do about what happens. There is a gap between the two. And one of the things I do in my spiritual practice is I work on focusing on that gap and expanding that gap so that I don't have knee-jerk reactions automatically, right? Most of the time, unless I'm like needing to swerve to avoid an accident, most of the time when something happens, I have some time to decide how am I going to react to what happened. And when I focus on intent with that time, I'm able to let my reaction be a reflection of who I truly am and not of that knee-jerk reaction. Because a lot of times when stimulus happens, my knee-jerk comes from a place of fear or anger or some other negativity. And I'm not saying those feelings don't have valid place in your heart and in your life. They are important to embrace. But I am saying that I don't usually want my actions to reflect those feelings. Right? If I have something happen to me that puts me into anger, rather than take an action, I have found it's much better for me to sit with that anger and to think about where is that coming from? And is that legit? Is there something I need to do in response to it? Or is that maybe if I change my perspective a little bit, maybe there's a different response that I can come back and love instead of mirroring that anger that I had directed in my direction. So those were some powerful, powerful lessons that I got from taking classes. From that very first Sunday, not only did I know that I wanted to continue with this learning, but I knew I wanted to be a practitioner. Those 10 people at the Toastmasters, like 9 out of 10 were practitioners. And this huge, huge place, they had like probably 30, 40 practitioners. And I had really admired them as Toastmasters. And I was like, I want what they've got. I want what they've got. And I knew there's a bunch of classes you got to take before you can go into practitioner training. And then there's 2 years of practitioner training. And as much as I knew that was what I wanted to do, and as much as I did take class after class after class, I did not actually get around to going into that practitioner training until 2020 happened. And I actually was not in centers the entire 20 years. I came and I went for various reasons, and that's okay too. This place was still in my heart, even if my presence wasn't here on Sundays. But in 2020, I was working 2 jobs and staying very busy, and then COVID came. And my second job shriveled away, like it was no longer being done at all. And my first job changed so radically, I had a lot of time on my hands from that job also. And so I was like, hey, I got all this time on my hands. I think I should finally get around to finishing the couple classes I got to take to qualify and then do my practitioner training. And so it took COVID, pandemic, for me to get that this is an opportunity for me to actually do what I said I was been doing for 20 years. And that is another piece of my rearview mirror that I want to share with you, that when calamity happens, you know, there's that saying, when God closes a door, he opens another door. And a friend of mine mentioned, yeah, but the hallway between the doors can be really long. Right? And so, yeah, I have to walk down that negative, that dark place in the hallway. But when a door gets closed, I look for the open doors. Like, where is there opportunity in this calamity? And for me, for COVID, that was the opportunity. That was the impetus I needed to finally get around to getting my practitioner license. And I strongly, strongly encourage people to take classes and become practitioners. And it's coming really from a selfish point of view. Like, as a practitioner, we vow to be of service to people and be of service to our community. But honestly, I learned so much going through those classes and through that process as being a practitioner, that I learned how to dive deeply into my own psyche and my own belief system, and to formalize what I believe in order to be able to share it with other people, right? And that was a really powerful, powerful process. And they'll certainly teach you other fun things too, but man, being a practitioner is really rewarding on many levels. And so, again, I want to put that pitch out to you. If there's anybody who's thinking that, maybe you don't want to wait 20 years like I did. I don't know. That's just me. Another class that was really powerful was called Financial Freedom, and I do believe Reverend Lane's going to be offering that or a version of it during the summer. And so I would also recommend, besides that Changing Thinking class, to take that over the summer. And it was powerful in helping me understand how money is really energy put into form, and how that energy circulates through my life and other people's lives in the form of money, but it's really energy. And so that's another powerful, powerful class that I would certainly recommend you take. So over my life, I have found that I have different emphasis at different times in my life, in my spirituality. When I was in my 20s and I first got into spirituality and coming to religious science, what it was called back then, I focused on integrity for myself. Like, I was not a very honest person, and I didn't lie, steal, and cheat a whole lot, but I did some. And so I learned how to be honest with the people in my life and be honest with myself. In my 30s, that honesty with myself transitioned into focusing on being authentic. Like, in my 30s, I focused on understanding who I was and what's important to me, and having that be reflected out in all my dealings. And it doesn't matter who I'm with. It doesn't matter if it's in a professional capacity or not. I might center myself a little bit in the professional world, but I certainly know who I am inside. And I certainly am authentic in what I say and do, supporting who I am on the inside. In my 40s, I'd gotten into teaching, and that's when I learned about compassion. So I learned about how to understand that I never know what's going on in other people's lives, right? I had no idea what was going on in some of my students' lives. I have no idea what their home life is like. I have no idea what kind of support they have. I don't even know if they ate breakfast. Maybe they're being horrible in my class because they're starving. I don't know. And so I learned to come from that place of compassion and empathy for all of us, that I don't know what you're going through. So I can assume that you're doing the very best you can, even if I'm not too crazy about the choices you're making, right? I can assume it's coming from that place of you're doing your very best. And I can have compassion for each of you on your journey, as I have compassion for myself now. And then as I hit my 50s, now I'm all about peace. And I would love to have world peace. There's nothing wrong with that. But really, I don't know how much influence I have over the world. So I focus on peace inside of myself especially. I want to have peace of mind. I want to be okay with whatever is going on. And that's where a lot of these spiritual practices about being present, right? Because a lot of times peace of mind gets ruined when I'm stressing about the future, right? The what ifs that might happen, that can be a really powerful thing. A lot of times peace of mind gets ruined when I forget that I have the locus of control in my life. When I slip into that victim mentality, I slip into people are doing things to me, that's when my peace of mind can evaporate temporarily. But I've gotten to the point where I am not interested in drama. I am not interested in exceeding amounts of conflict. I am interested in expressing my love to people. And what this teaching has taught me is that what I send out in the world gets reflected back to me. Right? When I'm coming from this place of love and coming from this place of harmony and balance and peace, that's what I have coming into my life. The teacher next door has all kinds of drama and grief and conflict. And my belief is that's a reflection of what's going on inside of him and what he's sending out. I have the same students. I teach a different subject, so it's not the exact same. But because I can reflect differently, I can get brought back into my life differently. And so those are the 4 powerful themes that I have embraced over the years those are the different ideas that has sustained me and that I have learned from. And I so appreciate the chance to look back in time and appreciate where I've come from and know that I continue to grow and know that I appreciate each one of you being on part of my path as that growth continues. So thank you for all your attention today.